Mac. Mac meaning son of. Mac Moore, Ignite. So those Macs, which come from the Scotland area, you're talking about those ancient Asiatic families of Scotland, and many of them. Because now, let me just share this here, just so we're clear on those names, because that's a great point you bring up. And a lot of people get confused by thinking that those names are their names, and that can be further from the truth there. You see, so but let's okay. So let me bring this up here so that everyone's clear on this here. So you had Moors or Saracens, Danes, and other kindred races, and the Gypsies are virtually the same people under different names. You see, so here it talks about the Saraceni, Agarini, Nubiani, and in the Scotch tradition, modern name in English, it translates, another name is Tinkler. Tinkler meaning tinsmiths. So those ancient names like Dubglass, Douglas, Derek, Kenneth, all those names are ancient Asiatic names from Europa, so not theirs.
So with looking at that, right, and then when you start looking at the land patents and you look at the actual records that outline that the surveyors back in the 1800s for different colonies actually penned down, showing which agents actually were representing the church and how they did a lot of acquisition and takeover on the land. And so when you look at that, and then when you look at, like, say, for example, I'm going to use, I guess the McQueen would be good fitting, because what Steve McQueen is actually the producer of this movie, this film. So as we know, he's heavily melanated. But however, when you go and you pull the photos, the scrapbooks, and the sepia prints that's connected to the McQueen family that settled in the North Carolina area around the late 1700s, they are all albinos. And so it's kind of sketchy with that because, with them, it took over an area that's known as Queensdale, and that's their estate right to this day. So they actually occupied a whole town and took over in that area. So the question becomes, at what point did this large shift happen where you would have the original Aboriginal Moors having that name, but then when you're looking at this big plight of with this immigration, especially heavily around the late 1800s, 1900s, and things of that nature, what caused that shift like that?
Shift from the names and the ownership?
Well, no, the shift, say, for example, as, you were saying, when you look at the Scottish Highlander map and you would see McQueen, McDonald, McMore, McMack, and things of that nature, right? So even on the crest, you will see that obviously they were Moors. But then when you get here and you start looking at the history, especially with looking at the land records, those land patents, the heirlooms and everything that was left within these historical society, and I just put an emphasis back on the McQueen family, that it's this big shift where it's obvious that this family of the McQueens, they don't look like the McQueen that is actually the producer of this movie, 12 Years a Slave. So and then too, you got to think about this, and this goes back to the whole concept of how you could tell the whole concept of morphic resonance, because here, when the mothers naturally name their children, the names that have been said to us that, oh, they're so ghetto, you shouldn't name your child these names, you need to have more of an English or a plain-sounding name, the names that the mothers naturally would give their children really are names that are Sanskrit, Arabic, Chaldean, in their natural form, Hebrew, things of that nature. And even like a lot of Mandarin names are what people would call so-called ghetto names. And then looking at the naming concept of how by tradition the person would actually just have their main name like Kaveniya, and then with looking at tradition in Islam and Arabic, how people would be named, and then they would be the son of, and then the name of their father, or the daughter of, and then the name of their mother, things of that nature, those naming concepts. So even just the nature of those names, by tradition here, especially in America, we didn't have British-sounding names.
Right, but
so you had Asiatics who came from that area to the Americas, though. Right, exactly. So I guess
if they bring their property, then the slaves would also take on that particular name.
Right.
Now, because there's been a war, there's been a war with the Asiatics in North America who were not down with their whole paradigm. They declared war against them. So if, like I just read from the Yamasee records, how Asiatics in North America were warring and you putting each other into servile conditions, there's no difference than if an Asiatic from Europa brings over his slaves, and then he's warring with Asiatics in North America. But now let's say it's something he's maybe lacking numbers because he's from Europa, so he needs numbers. So he brings over his slaves. They help increase his numbers. He trains them up, right? And so if anything happens to the Asiatic master, then whatever slave or his children that he puts in that seat would take on what he has. Whatever he has would go down to them. Even if for example, the union between the slave and he has a child from that union, that child would inherit that. Whatever business assets that dad had or that mother had will be passed on to them as well. So that would, and then you had that tradition that will go on for generations. You see, but when you want to trace the original names back, those old names back, you're going to go back to the nobility of Europa, and those are all Asiatics, and you have all those names. You see, so it couldn't come from them because they're not the ancient ones there.
Right. So on that note too, I guess that's a point to look at where the stress the importance of the genealogy, because in true essence, if someone is connected to North America and they don't really have any trace of people coming from Britain, then you have to look at like, okay, would that really be my name if none of my peoples in my bloodline even came from over there? You know what I'm saying?
Right. And now I read a couple statements from the movie. Remember from the movie when Eliza told Solomon, you are settling into your role as Mr. Platt.
Right,
so
exactly.
Here we have an example of how, even if you weren't an Asiatic from Europa, those that were acquiesced to that contract had to take on the name. See, so and based upon the movie, these statements, they did it as a survival tactic.
Right.
So when the brother told him on the ship, if you want to survive, do and say as little as possible. Tell no one who you really are, and tell no one you can read and write. See, so they acquiesced to that contract. So they had to take on that slave status. They had to take on those foreign names.
I see what you're saying. I see exactly what you're saying with that. But brother, did you have any other?
So from that perspective, actually, upon further analysis from that perspective, because they acquiesced into that contract and agreed to that contract, then they take on the status, they take on the name, and henceforth the term that it's a slave name is not inaccurate. See, if we look at it from that perspective.
Okay, that's a good way of looking at it. It's a lot of hidden, like there's a lot of history that's involved with even making any type of assertions. But my other question was, you had initially you read a statement saying like the Scots, these various national people or groups, that they're one and the same. Where was that quote taken from?
Oh, okay. That is from David McRitchie, Volume 1.
Okay, Ancient and Modern Britons.
And Ancient and Modern Britons, yes, Volume 1.
Okay.
David McRitchie.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right, brother.
Okay,
Peace, love. Have a good night.
You as well.
Good night.
Ooh, wing. So, Amani, so we had left off with Solomon, where we were talking about him being in Washington, or the Washington pen.
Yes.
Then from there, he's transported down into the Louisiana area. Is that correct?
Yes.
And from there, that's where we get into the whole concept of Louisiana, being a major port during that time period.
Mhm.
So,
yes.
And then from there, after a certain period of time, in the book, I know that it goes into talking about how the Northrop family that was up from Rhode Island, that was connected to Solomon's father, a friend of the family had came down to Louisiana, and he was an attorney, and he is the one that helped to assist to free Solomon.
Mhm.
And then from there,
I see.
Solomon goes back up. Him and Solomon go back up into D.C., and a lawsuit is launched against the person that was over the penitentiary, Washington Penn, and they lost the case. But then after that, that's when it's the reunion between Solomon and his family. So,
right. Well, yeah, they didn't really get into that in the movie.
And I should tell everyone.
Case.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I think there's a few seconds left. I heard a message. 60 seconds.
Oh yeah, we have.
The operator.
Oh yes. Well, that's the with Block Talk. We could go probably for another 5 minutes or so. But
okay.
Yeah. So it's with that in mind, everything just goes around, full circle. So, because I know that you said you had some other points and everything that you wanted to bring to the table and build upon. But one thing that you did say, is that they're pretty much dropping keys, but it's if you know the historical component, you can put everything together to see that they are telling you the truth. But if the people are not aware, then they may not see it.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So, we have to look at it deeper, and then in actuality, it's sending us messages, communicating with us. And that movie, it sent us some very powerful messages, reminding us who we really are, and that some of our ancestors who chose to survive have to just play a role. And that role was never them, and that's, clearly highlighted in the movie. You see, but, if you're, we can't fall victim to their sorcery, because if you're in that mindset, you will not be able to pick up on those important keys, you see. And just, I want to also get back here real quick and share with the family how this whole process related to the Carolinas and the Yamasee War, where it states here on page 26, basically, incidents of this type stem from legal ambiguities involved in the process of transforming human beings from a state of freedom into forms of property. Because the Americans were naturally free, in the European eyes at least, they found it necessary to improvise ways of legally dissolving their freedom. You see, so that